of the summer series. Everything else has gone fairly swimmingly, so we're sorry about that. And thank you very much for joining us at 5 o'clock, because we know this is a very awkward time. For the last time at the summer series, which I feel quite sad about, I'm going to go through the house rules. It's been my mantra of the past 2 days. Can you make sure your microphone is on mute? And if you have any questions for our speakers, then if you just pop them in the chat with your name and organisation, that will be absolutely perfect. So obviously the session today is talking about partnerships. And to start that conversation, we have a little presentation from Laura Hutchinson from Historic Royal Palaces. Laura.
Right. Hello, everyone. And before I begin, David very valiantly took responsibility there for the technical issues that were actually mine. My Surface had a complete meltdown just as I tried to log in here. So very sorry, everyone, that we're running a little bit late. That's very much my fault. I'll just share my screen. Here we go. Still not working properly. Great. Okay. So really good to be here, and thank you very much for having me. As David said, I'm Laura Hutchinson. I'm the head of media and PR for Historic Royal Palaces. So look after a variety of different partnerships on HRP's behalf, with media, our social media channels as well. But today I'm going to talk to everyone about filming, which is my responsibility at HRP, and specifically working with broadcast partners. So I'll just give you one example of a partnership that we've got and talk through the sort of benefits of that partnership for us, and the ways of working that we have found have worked for us in terms of working with production companies. So, moving on. Okay. Just before we begin, this is a presentation that I've given previously, I must admit, and there's very strange things said in my office, but one of the things that I've heard a couple of times is we're taking a break because Raven Poo has ruined the continuity of the shot. So this is for the series that we shoot about the Tower of London, which I'm going to talk about today. So the weird and wonderful things you have to deal with. Okay, so Inside the Tower of London is our series that airs on Channel 5, and we make with a production company who are our partners on this project called Lion Television. They might be familiar to many of you. They make quite a lot of natural history programming. We have now shot, well, we're in the midst of shooting the 4th series of this program, which has been really, really successful for us. So thus far, we've shot 16 hours of television for this series, and we've got another 4 episodes to come. So it's a long-running partnership that has been successful. In terms of the benefits for us, the things that we get out of it, we very specifically went into, went out 4 years ago looking for a broadcast partnership that would bring us reputational benefit in terms of raising the profile of the Tower of London with domestic audiences, and also visitors in terms of driving visits to site. Really, really interestingly, obviously, this was at a point pre-pandemic where we were sort of operating on the margins of how to drive more domestic visitors to our sites, and had the luxury of being able to rely on international tourism and inbound tourism. So about sort of 70% of our audience visiting the tower previously were inbound tourists. And obviously the bottom has completely dropped out of that over the course of the last year, and that has made the significance of this series to our organisation in terms of our corporate priorities obviously even more important. So we've recently been part of the Alva benchmarking survey, and TV came up as a really strong motivator to visit, driving 18% of the audience surveyed, which was actually one of the highest motivators to visit, of all of our kind of different bits of marketing. So we were really pleased with how it's performed. And anecdotally, we're now at the point where when we're shooting the series, people are coming up to us and saying, oh, I've come here today because I wanted to meet this beefeater, which is obviously great to hear. The other thing that the series does for us is there is a commercial benefit, and obviously, those financial margins are more important to organisations like ours now than they ever have been. So we're able to generate filming income off the back of it. This is part of a broader, suite of filming income that we look to generate. So we have an income target for the year, and a lot of it has been met by securing these kind of big long-term broadcast partnerships, rather than trying to do everything piecemeal and be in every single Tudor history documentary ever, which of course we are. And then in terms of the benefits, finally, off the back of this series, we've built up really good relationships with the commissioners at the channels. So at Channel 5 specifically, we've been able to liaise with the commissioner directly too, and that has really helped us to secure other programmes about our other sites. So we had one about Kensington Palace on a couple of weeks ago, so 2 episodes about Kensington Palace. And next week, in a shameless plug, we've got one going out about Hampton Court. So it has been our kind of, our real priority to try and secure a similar programme about Hampton Court, which is a building that's kind of similar in scale and personality to the tower. And we pulled it off and we hope to get more. So, in short, this partnership, broadcast partnerships have really, really delivered for us and have become even more important over the course of the past year. But how do you make them happen? So over here on the right, I'll give a shout out to the Chief Yeoman Warder Pete carrying the keys to the Tower of London. But how do we unlock a successful broadcast partnership? Well, to begin with, as I said, we set out very, very deliberately to secure a series about the Tower of London 4 years ago. So as I said, it was our ambition to do that, to drive domestic visits to the site and really focus on that particular audience. We very much knew what we wanted to get out of the programme, in terms of a mix between history documentary and an observational documentary, a mix of the kind of contemporary life of the tower with the history and the stories that we tell here. And we set out to look for a partner to do that with us. And the thing that I would say about that experience is I think we were brave enough to pull back when we thought we'd got it wrong, when we thought that the trust might not be there and that we might not be able to create the product that we hoped for. So we had a few different attempts at securing the right broadcast partnership before we got to this one with Lion, and we felt that they were wanting to make a programme that was kind of, that met all of our objectives so that it would work well, we would work well together. Once we'd done that, it was really, really important to us to establish the ground rules of the partnership and how it was going to work. And, I have some very, very specific rules about filming at the site. For example, I ban filming of meetings completely. So if you ever see a meeting on one of our programme, it's wholly staged, because I don't believe that the filming of any of the meetings that we have would be beneficial to us. And we have had that dialogue from the beginning with the production companies that we've worked for and been really, really clear on what we can and can't do. That said, regular dialogue is important too, because I think when you're working with a partner who comes at your audience from a different angle, you often need to compromise and repeatedly explain why you can do things and why you can't do things. And the way that we structure that is that we have the kind of operation of the production on the ground, and then I have regular calls with the exec producers of the series, just to kind of keep in touch with them and make sure that we kind of resolve issues as they happen. I think it's really important, and something that's interesting to consider when you work in our sector is that we are experts in storytelling. People who work in museums are experts in storytelling and brilliant at what we do, but people who work in production are also experts in storytelling and brilliant at what they do, and they sometimes know their audience better than you do. And so I think, something that's been a kind of valuable lesson for me is sometimes to be humble about what they want and trust in their expertise and their ability to tell a story, in a way that would be successful for us. And that's something that's kind of happened to us over time working with production companies. And you expect the same in return, obviously. I think sharing successes. So we have had an unusual relationship in that I have tried to make sure that the production company feel invested in the benefits that the television programme is delivering for us, as well as for them. So they want the ratings, we want it to convert into people visiting our site. So we've tried to kind of constantly share those priorities. And then finally, in terms of this particular partnership, longevity has been really, really important. It's been going on for 4 years now, and I think it's very easy for me to sit here and say, that it is working very well, but I think that is due to a lot of kind of investment in ironing out the kinks sometimes. And, you know, I think building long-term relationships and partners is really important, because you get the kind of trust that I've just been talking about, in a way that, you know, is much more difficult when you're working with someone on a kind of one-off project. So those are the things that I think have helped us make this a success. And actually, that is the end of my very short presentation. So hopefully I didn't go on any longer than 10 minutes.
That's absolutely perfect, Laura. Thank you. And if anyone watching does have any questions, as I say, pop them in the chat and we will go through them at the end. Now, if we head on up to lovely Sheffield, we have Kirstie Hamilton from Sheffield Museums, who is going to be able to talk a bit about the partnerships that organisation has. Should we start off maybe, Kirstie, with the partnerships with some national museums and galleries? Or you just unmute, Kirstie, sorry.
Or should we start with the merger, just because it's been...
Yeah, absolutely, perfect, yeah.
What we've been doing. Okay, if I just share screen 2 and just... So, hopefully... Okay. So, in Sheffield, back in the 90s, the City Council took quite a kind of, I suppose, a really innovative and experimental approach with the museums up here and the collections, and they established 2 museum charitable trusts. The first one's in the country, I think, and the first one came in 1994 as the Industrial Museums formed a trust with Kelham Island Museum and Abbeydale Industrial Hamlet and Sheffield Wheel. And then in 1998, the Museum Sheffield came into being, and that looked after the Graves Gallery and Weston Park Museum, and then the Millennium Gallery when it came on board in 2021, and the Ruskin Gallery as well then. So these 2 independent trusts were sort of established for various reasons, but essentially out of a kind of crisis need really for the city. And they separated the museum's collections. And although we were sister museum trusts, we didn't necessarily work so closely together. So over the last 4 years, we've been going through an ongoing process of looking at, you know, what's the benefit of us connecting together for the long term for the city, really. And prior to COVID, we'd kind of got to a point of thinking that was a good idea. During COVID, it sort of came that there was even more of a good idea, and it was an essential piece of work really for the city. So, as I say, that back in the 90s, that shared history of Sheffield was sort of separated, and the collections were separated almost in that unnatural disconnect. So this idea of process and making, which is pervasive across all the collections, was sort of headed up by the Industrial Museums Trust, and then the objects that were made through those processes were in the Museum Sheffield side of things. So it was a bit of an unnatural split, and together we kind of were aware that by bringing those collections back together, you could tell a stronger, more interesting story of Sheffield, but also acknowledging that stories aren't one-dimensional, and it's not just because it's an industrial heritage item that it might that it doesn't have a relationship with, you know, a piece of taxidermy, a specimen of taxidermy, or a you know, a painting within the collection. So the kind of more holistic nature of collections, I think, is more, I suppose, on trend at the minute than it maybe was in the 90s. Also, you know, the collections are all owned by the city, but our major funder was the same. So we were having the same conversations in duplicate almost with the Sheffield Council on an ongoing basis. And so we were kind of, I suppose, dancing around each other in a way. But back in 2016, we started through an application to Arts Council as part of an NPO uplift to do some work together, predominantly looking at learning and volunteering and collections to see how the teams could integrate and where the, you know, shared ideas were and where the opportunities were. And that was quite a fruitful bit of work. But those ongoing conversations, it's really important to say that it has been a kind of 4-year journey to get here. We have become a new trust for the city on the 1st of April 2021, but that means that the 2 former trusts are kind of being wound up, It's been a huge bit of due diligence and legal work in terms of what you actually have to do around an independent charitable trust and moving forward. And also just to emphasise that this, for us, it wasn't about cost saving. You know, this new organisation hasn't come with a dowry, if you like. There's no additional funding at the minute, but what it does do is it strengthens this infrastructure for the city, and actually it allows us to kind of be more ambitious and think more about what Sheffield can be and what we want to achieve as a cultural museums organisation for the city. Our shared service for the city and planning really more holistically in how we can work. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 6 sites. So what this trust does is it brings together 6 sites across the city. I'll take you through the 6 sites because I'm sure you won't be aware of them. But also it brings together these collections through art, social and industrial history, and natural science. We want to tell more compelling and comprehensive stories of Sheffield, and we want to talk more in depth about the links across the environment and the location, the stories of industry, the stories of individual personalities, the great art that's been created here. So I'm just going to talk. The Abbeydale Industrial Hamlet is one of the most important heritage sites in Sheffield. It's essentially a factory, but it's quite a novel idea in Sheffield, where most of the processes were separated out into different organisations. This sort of complex of buildings, the Hamlet, shows the different processes in each building, and what we're hoping to do is just give, back in the 80s, this was its real heyday, when it had lots of live interaction going and all the furnaces were going, etc. At the minute, I think it needs a bit more of a kind of some digital engagement there and interpretation, but also just a bit more love and care. So we're looking forward to the potential that we can see at that site. The Graves Gallery is the home of the city's art collection, and again, that's a gallery that's earmarked for redevelopment, and COVID has kind of delayed that further. So at the minute, we're just working with some funding from the Ampersand Foundation over 5 years to do some redisplay work at the Graves. And again, throughout lockdown, that's been something we've been doing. We're due to open at the end of summer, with a refurbished gallery on a sort of low scale level. So the whole building needs a huge refurbishment. We're just wanting the collections to look the best that they possibly can at the moment. Kelham Island Museum, so you see here this huge River Don engine, really vast spaces, loads of stories of these amazing achievements and massive engineering, and quite a loyal visitor base to it as well. I should say, as part of our decision to become a trust, a new trust, we decided that all the sites should be free of charge. So that's been interesting to see how the visitor demographic will change. Millennium Gallery opened in 2021. It's the home of our major exhibition programme. It's also the home of the city's designated metalwork collection, and also the Ruskin collection, which was amassed by John Ruskin for the working people of Sheffield. So lots of connections from this building out to those industrial sites as well that haven't really been utilised before or maximised before. And Sheffield Wheel, which is another listed site, working water wheel, with grinding wheels attached, really fascinating to understand the sort of simplicity but also the complexity of the process. And then last of all, we have Weston Park Museum, which is the city museum. It's Sheffield prehistory to the present day, and gives you that kind of sort of starting point if you want to learn more about the city that you're visiting or you live in. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm going to stop sharing and stop wittering and hand back to you, David.
Thank you. That's perfect. We have a question in the chat to Laura. This comes from Molly from the British Museum. He said that you mentioned generating filming income. Is this income generated by the film, or is this securing funding to create the production?
Thanks, Molly. No, it's income generated by the filming itself. So the production companies secure the funding for the production from the broadcaster. You know, we have looked at models in the past of, you know, investing in productions ourselves back when, you know, we had the money to do that, but we have found that we haven't needed to do that because we've been able to secure the kind of productions that we want via having really good relationships with production companies. So we do take income for the filming, so we charge location location fees for the filming. When we do kind of partnerships with people over a long period of term, we have different rates for partnerships, which obviously bring other benefits to us than that go slightly beyond some of the more regular filming that we might facilitate, but it does generate income directly.
Thank you for that, Laura. I certainly think so. Thank you for the question, Molly, as well. She says thank you. I think Molly's happy with the answer. If Kirstie, if we could just, obviously you're Director of Programmes at Sheffield Museums, if we could just talk about some of the partnerships the organisation has on exhibitions. I know it's got quite a proud history of working with some really big nationals. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how those partnerships come about?
So we've had an ongoing partnership with the V&A since before the Millennium Gallery opened. So back, I think as early as 1998, there were conversations with the V&A, and that was really connecting to Sheffield as a centre of metalwork production and its history there, and that continues. So it's worked in various different ways over the years, and we kind of just keep in touch, and we share staff we share training sometimes where we'll just share experiences, or we'll be working on a learning project together or an exhibition, and it has various different models. We still pay fees for things, but in the past it's not been that way. So it's an evolving partnership, and I think it's quite important that we've got key personnel that we keep in touch with, but it's about those personalities. And I'd say we have a similar relationship with the National Portrait Gallery, again through working with them over a lot of years. Really, we've developed quite key understandings of how each other work. In terms of everything we do in terms of our exhibition programme is a collaboration. We don't do anything that's about an individual curator delivering a project that's their passion project. We've kind of stepped away from that. It's not that they're not doing their passion work, but they'll be doing it with other people. So it's about questioning and trying to bring other viewpoints into things and thinking about the relevance of it. So the Nationals is one model, but I think across the exhibition programme, we've got so many different ways of working. All of them, though, it's about developing those relationships. And what we discover is in that development is kind of working together on a physical project. It allows you to kind of test each other's boundaries and understand where everyone's coming from. And actually it's quite a good opportunity. An exhibition programme is a temporary thing. If it goes slightly awry, it's not as big a deal as anything that's going to be sited there permanently as well. So we're more prone to taking risks within that programme as well.
Thank you very much for that. We've got another question. This one comes from Rosie Barker at Birmingham Museums. She said that really interested that Sheffield has gone to a free entry model across all its sites. Too early, no doubt, to see what impact it's had, but she was wondering what consultation was done beforehand to make that decision. So
this was something that was quite key to the conversations we had with the boards. So we had obviously the two former trust boards and then the board of the new trust, to kind of keep all in the loop and have this conversation with. The new board were the ones who had to finally make the decision. And what the decision is that we used to have an entrance fee model at the exhibitions in Millennium Gallery. So it's something that we've done quite a bit of research for in the past. We removed that back in 2009. And what we did in 2009 was we started to be more overt in our ask for donations. And it had real impact actually. So our donations kind of went up, and at a point where the income from the exhibitions, the exhibitions never covered their costs essentially for us. So when we were looking at Abbeydale Industrial Hamlet and Kelham Island, who both had fees, we kind of was thinking about, well, how can we kind of monetize this through changing the shop offer, for example, and also donations. The shop offer will come later, but at the minute we've introduced donation contactless donation points and also donations boxes on site, and they've been really fruitful because people had been aware that there was a fee and they're now free, and it's working quite well. I have to say though, the audience visitor numbers are low with COVID, as you'd expect, in terms of obviously capacities and social distancing. So it is an interesting time to be doing it, but one thing that we're really clear on is that we'll keep reviewing this. What we didn't want to do was open and then kind of change it sort of, 2 months in. We felt that was there's this message that we're a new trust, we're working together, new organisation. If we were going to do this work now in terms of making it free, it was important that we got it at the right timing. And so really it's, if this goes badly and a year in we have to put fees back there, then we have to review that, and our board will be expecting us to review that. So not so much a consultation about with the public, although there had been some really helpful external research which we've been part of recently, but that was looking specifically at the Millennium Gallery, so it influenced our thinking. But we've not done any in-depth research at those actual sites, which I suppose you could say it is risky, but actually in terms of the visitor numbers and the amount of money that was coming through those entrance fees, they weren't hugely significant.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you, Rosie, for the question. One thing I wondered if I could just ask you, Laura, as regards working with the broadcast partners that HRP do you find it's very difficult with partners from outside of the sector understanding the sort of unique challenges of the heritage sector? As in, I imagine huge teams of film crew arriving at a historic site can pose a few interesting problems.
Yes, they can. Yeah, and this is particularly, if there are some conservators on the line, which maybe some of the profile pictures might indicate that there are. This is something that comes to the fore when you do, much larger scale filming than the kind of filming I was talking about earlier with the Tower programme, which is fairly light touch. So yes, you do, encounter obviously expectations versus reality in terms of, we want to transform this 16th century beautifully adorned with priceless tapestries room into a ballroom in The Witcher or something like that. And yeah, that's a really interesting challenge to manage. And I'm very lucky to work with colleagues in our conservation team who are very solutions based. And our approach to kind of large scale filming like that is always, we can't do that, but we can do this. And it's always a kind of a negotiation, but one that I think that is based on really good communication and being, as I was saying, being kind of honest about what your ground rules are from the beginning. So yeah, I mean, the other challenge I have with partners from outside of the sector, it is what I was sort of getting at earlier, which is when my colleagues have created an absolutely beautiful exhibition which tells a very, very specific story, it is challenging to then hand over that story to a broadcast partner who is going to approach it through a different lens, and being able to let go and appreciate the value that they might add can be really difficult sometimes. And I include myself in that because I'm obviously very invested in our exhibitions program and the things that we create too, and that is an ongoing process of having to remind yourself that that other points of view are sort of in terms of the way you tell the story are valid too.
Thank you very much for that. The first session we ran yesterday morning was with West Cheshire Museums, and they were all talking about siloed working. And Kirstie, I was wondering, from their experiences, they said that they've got 4 sites sort of split across 2 towns in West Cheshire. And they said a lot of staff and volunteers feel very proud about being part of a specific site and didn't always necessarily work together. And I wondered if you'd been considering the sort of siloed working, how to combat that with bringing the 2 trusts together in Sheffield.
Thanks, David. I would say that, we're not abnormal. All organisations have aspects of silo working, as much as we like not to. But both trusts have quite a kind of a lean staff team. So, for example, our curatorial team, our exhibitions team, worked across all the sites anyway. So there was a lot of cross-site activity from both of the former trusts. So coming together, although the model's bigger, actually that sort of cross-site working is actually quite helpful. So we've got one centrally based comms team that work across the whole organisation rather than are based at an individual site. And we're just sort of talking about how we can move people around. so that they, you know, rather than it always being, you know, well, the learning team or you know, or Kelham Island or whatever it, you know, we actually move people around a bit over a number of years, so that actually that ownership can be shared. And we've also been doing quite a lot around thinking about how people can access the sites as tours and learn more about the sites, but also around how we do some master planning during COVID. We had these great ideas of lots of getting together and getting to know you sessions in person, you know, the post-it note exercises, all of that sort of stuff. But we're just about to kind of bite the bullet and go and do some work on master planning, which is actually digital, so that everybody can input, but actually, you know, they don't have to necessarily be in the same room. And that again is about us asking for everyone's opinion, everyone's ideas, and then kind of like sharing it out across the whole team. So we're trying to kind of not be as hierarchical as we might have been, but also not as site specific. So just because you've always worked at Abbeydale doesn't mean you might not have an opinion about Weston Park. We're trying to encourage people to think more widely like that. Whether it'll be a success, I don't know, but I'd say we've got very few members of staff who are used to being based on one site, which is a real plus in that silo working.
Thank you. Laura, I noticed you sort of a nod of recognition when I said about maybe this idea of people being very sort of loyal to the sites they work at. Do you have the same at Historic Royal Palaces?
Oh God, yes. Yeah, it was a nod of recognition because you know, I think we share that challenge too, and it's a really interesting one. And you know, similar to what Kirstie was saying, we have, you know, central cross-site teams who have the ability to be flexible, but obviously, you know, large teams that are based at the sites as well. And from a comms perspective, with that hat of mine on, it's a really interesting challenge of, you know, selling the organisation versus selling the particular sites. And there's a degree to which you have to create a broad church under which, you know, different sites with very different personalities sit. And the sites in our portfolio are incredibly different. You know, here at the Tower of London, you're in a very military structured environment. It's a village, people live here. You know, that obviously causes people to have a level of investment in the site that is different to somebody who comes in at one of the other sites maybe. You know, Kensington is a very kind of fashion focused, stylish place. And we try to adopt that approach of, you know, everyone being invested in the particular personality of their site, but with the kind of broader corporate understanding of what the charity does, sitting as an umbrella over the top of it. But you know, I sympathise with, was it West Cheshire Museums, because it's tricky to navigate, and it can be very tricky to navigate if you work in a central team, because, you know, in my line of work, a lot of people want me to show loyalty to the Tower of London and Kensington Palace and Hampton Court Palace at various points in my job, and, you know, my loyalty is with them all. So it's difficult to navigate. Sorry, that was a bit waffly.
No, that was brilliant. On the same sort of loose topic of silos as well, actually, because obviously, Laura, me and you spoke for an interview, Museums and Heritage Advisor, a few months ago. And I was thinking about when you talked about the sort of, because some of the filming for The Favourite happened on site, didn't it? The film that came out a few years ago. And obviously then there was the exhibition that came from that. And I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit about not seeing partners in one way, if that makes sense. So you've got a production company, but also then keeping that relationship, you're able to get programming from it. Do you think that's important when you have these external partners, that you look at all the different ways you can work together?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you look at the way that the partnership is going to play out over the long term, and the benefits that can bring. And you know, our approach to doing feature films until very recently was that they were income generating, that, you know, we were doing them on the basis that they make us a significant amount of money, and that in itself is valuable when we're not at peak times, and, you know, that was a completely valid approach. But with The Favourite, we kind of struck upon an opportunity where one of the palaces was actually playing itself, which is really unusual for us for feature films. And, you know, saw benefit in that, in terms of Hampton Court wasn't just appearing as a backdrop, it actually was, you know, a feature of the storyline. And we tried to kind of extend, we very deliberately set out to try and extend the relationship longer than that, because we were aware, obviously, that you know, a feature film like that, you know, which became a, you know, massive Oscar success, reaches an audience that, you know, we can only dream of, and that can bring real benefits to us too. So yeah, I suppose, you know, that what I would say is it's about thinking about partnerships in the long term, and sometimes the immediate benefits could actually be outweighed by the long-term sort of strategic benefits.
Thank you. I also remember you telling me that when the Muppets were filming, I think lots of visitors were quite surprised to see Kermit the Frog popping up in a historic environment. So I imagine that was quite an interesting experience as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, the mortifying thing about Kermit the Frog was that he was just sort of Sparko on a table with no hand underneath him. So it was sort of the corpse of Kermit the Frog, which isn't what some people want to see. But yeah, I think, you know, I would filming. I've tried to champion, and this, you know, this isn't always the case, but I try to champion it within our organisation as something that can potentially add to the visitor experience rather than detract from it. And that's very easy for me to say, you know, but more difficult in practice when I'm calling up our colleagues in ops and saying, so I want to bring 55 trucks, 180 extras. You know, obviously that is disruptive, but you know, the experience that people had when The Favourite was shooting at Hampton Court, where they were walking through Fountain Court, which is on the Baroque side of the palace, and Olivia Colman was throwing open a window and shouting out at some cellists in the garden in full Queen Anne garb. I mean, like, that is a serious value add to your visit, I would argue. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. If just as a final thing to end on viewing, if you've got any last questions, please do pop them in the chat. Kirstie, on a final note to do with the merger, I was wondering, have you, because I'm sure some people watching this or that will be watching on demand will be maybe considering, particularly with the pandemic, bringing different museums or different groups together to sort of steady the ship. Have you got any advice from your experiences thus far on how to go about that, what to do and what not to do?
Gosh, you know, I think it's been such a huge bit of work and such a long journey that I'm not sure I've kind of through it to reflect properly, to be honest. But I think it's as much about that need, really, and whatever that, you know, you need to be coming together needs to be mutually beneficial, and it needs to have a shared goal and understanding that, well, not necessarily shared goal, but complementary goals. I think it's about understanding that, you know, at the end of the day, you're all there for the right reasons, and actually it doesn't really matter. You might have a bond for whatever, but actually that mutual reason for being together is really solid. And you know, we were lucky in that, you know, the nature of the collections and the fact that, you know, we are a story of Sheffield. Those two things are really key. I think that, you know, the idea of just banding, you know, museums together for the sake of it, you know, or as a cost saving measure, you know, this is save no money. This is cost money for us to do this work. So I kind of think, you know, if it's a financially motivated reason, then you've got to look really hard at that. But as I say, I think it's about clarity of that purpose, really. I don't know if that really answers it, but that would be my, you know, just do a bit of soul searching and share that soul searching, and, you know, make sure you come up with the same sort of five words that are the reason for you doing this, really.
No, thank you. That's perfect. And I think that's probably a nice point to sort of round things off. I'm conscious we're getting near the end of the time, and it's getting towards 6 o'clock on a weeknight. Everyone has been working all day, and I don't want to take up anyone's time anymore. Thank you so much, Laura and Kirstie. It's been really interesting hearing from you. It's been really fascinating. And thank you everyone who's joined us, and thank you to everyone who's joined us throughout this 2-day event. I apologise that you've had to put up with me as the host, and that I've gradually looked more and more tired throughout it. But it's been an absolute pleasure. And as I said earlier, one of my catchphrases that I will say for the final time is that this has been recorded and will be uploaded in a couple of weeks' time so everyone can watch back. And hello again to everyone watching it recorded in the future. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Kirstie and Laura. You've been brilliant. And thank you for me and Anna for joining us for the M&H Summer Series.